Welcome to another episode of the Your Longevity Blueprint podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Sharon Stills, who is a naturopathic medical doctor who helps perimenopausal and menopausal women to pause and evaluate life so they can live the second act of their story stronger, healthier, and sexier while aging backwards. Using her 20 plus years of experience and extensive training and background in European biological medicine, anti-aging therapies, and bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, she has successfully helped thousands of women transition gently through the different stages of their lives with all natural methods. Dr. Stills is passionate about spreading the word about her signature Red Hot Sexy Menopause program, the philosophy she developed for you to reinvent your health, explore your spirit, and discover your sexy so that you too can create and live the life you desire and deserve. She founded and ran one of the largest and most successful naturopathic clinics in the country for a decade and is the host of the Science of Self-Healing podcast. She's an expert physician for Women's Health Network, and she educates other physicians as the co-led North American lecturer for the Paracelsus Academy in Switzerland. Patients work with Dr. Stills in a variety of ways, through telemedicine consults and her life-changing retreats for individuals or small groups in healing and rejuvenating locations around the world. Some patients will even fly in to see her or fly in just to get the chance to work with her one-on-one. Welcome to the show, Dr. Stills.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice introduction.
I want to hear more about this European biological medicine, but before we dive into that, tell me your story. So how did you get started in your healing journey and then help heal others?
Oh gosh, well, I think a lot of us have that wounded healer story. So we had our own health issues, and that's how we became a physician ourselves. And I'm no different. So growing up, I was so sick. I had severe allergies. I had severe asthma, so much so that the pediatrician wanted to name one of his exam rooms after me.
Wow.
Like, it's a nice honor to have a room named after you, but not because you're always in it sick. And so I was in and out of hospitals and just felt horrible. That was in my younger years. Then in my teen years, I had so many hormonal issues. I was depressed, I was overweight. Then I got into being addicted because I wasn't happy with my life. So I went through being addicted to everything from A to Z. And then by the time I was 20, I was married and pregnant with my first son. And that was a wake-up call for me. I don't want, you know how it is as mothers, we want the best for our children better than we have. And so I thought, I don't want my son to suffer.
Yeah.
I was sick. I don't want him to inherit these things that I dealt with. And so I started delving into what are other options. And I happened to live next door to someone whose brother was a colon hydrotherapist of all things. So my first introduction into natural medicine was having a tube stuck up your butt to clean out your poop. So that's how I got started. And from there,
not many people can say that.
So from there, I got really into nutrition. And I remember, so we're talking about 1989. This is before the internet. I remember sitting on the floor of Wegmans. That was the natural health food store. I don't even think Whole Foods was around back then.
Yeah.
And so at least not in my area. And I was just sitting on the floor. There was 3 little shelves of natural kind of foods. And I was just looking through, what can I give my son that will make him be healthy? Because I don't want him to suffer like I did. And then what happened was I ended up having another son and getting divorced. And then I needed to support my 2 children.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I can go back to being an administrative assistant because that's what I had been doing before I had my kids. Or I thought I can live my passion because work is something we spend so many hours at. And you talk about, I know your podcast is all about longevity. And one of the things I'm always dealing with patients is, what do you do? Are you happy? Because we spend more hours at work probably than anywhere else. So back then I just decided I want to be happy. I want to live my passion. I was devouring any book I could get my hands on at the time. And I thought I had struggled to figure out what I could do for my son, because when I took him to the pediatrician, it was just, he needs antibiotics, because my son at the time was having eczema and he was having ear infections. And it wasn't until my next door neighbor told me, you got to get him off of dairy and all of these other things. So I thought I had struggled to figure it out for my son. I thought, why don't I go to school and so I can become a pediatrician and help other parents so they don't have to struggle like I did. And then I heard about this thing called naturopathic school. I was living in Buffalo, New York at the time, and there was a doctor across the border in Canada, because that's where it was licensed. And I remember packing up the kids and going across the border and going to see him. And I just remember standing in his parking lot when I walked out and said, I'm going to do what he does, because he's really cool. And so I just really used the power of intention, because I was 24. I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. I was divorced. My ex-husband was not going to be contributing in any way. And I didn't really realize at the time that to do what he did, I still had to go get an undergraduate degree. So it was a 10-year journey of schooling and commitment. And I just kept affirming it. I'm going to be a naturopathic physician. And I did it.
That's wonderful.
So that's how I got started.
That's awesome. So where does European biological medicine come in then? So when did you start transitioning and learning that? We've talked about functional medicine and anti-aging medicine on the podcast, and maybe this is similar or maybe it's different. So can you speak to that?
Sure. So I went to Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine, which is in Arizona. It's one of the accredited naturopathic medical schools. There's not that many of them. And when I was there was these opportunities to be student reps for companies. And so you could learn their product line and help educate the students. And I thought, oh, that's a great idea. I want to do that. And Thorne, which you've probably heard of, very popular, they had a student rep position. And I was like, I'm going to be this Thorne student rep. I was so sure of it. I went for my interview. I figured I nailed it. And then I found out my classmate got the job and not me. And my ego was like, how could that be? How could she have gotten it? And so I took a few deep breaths and calmed down and just went along my way. And then very soon after, I got offered another student rep, which was to work with Pleomorphic Products. That was the name of the company at the time. They distributed the Sanum Remedies. And these Sanum Remedies were these remedies that these doctors who had really great results around town were using. And I thought, I want to know what they're doing. So
I don't know what that is. You'll have to tell us what that is.
The moral of that story is trust in the universe, because what's yours will come to you and what's yours will not be offered to you. So I was very fortunate that I didn't get the Thorne job. I got this job and I started working with the clinics in Switzerland. At the time, Dr. Rao was leading the Paracelsus Clinic. And while I was in medical school, I started lecturing around the country to physicians, to DOs, to other naturopaths about the pleomorphic products and the Sanum Remedies. And so the Sanum Remedies are a group of remedies. They're isopathic remedies. So they are similar to homeopathics in the way that paired, but they actually have physical constituents in them. So instead of a 200x being stronger than a 30x, it's the opposite. The higher the x, actually, the stronger the product is, because it does have constituents. And I could talk for hours on this, so I'll just briefly say it's based upon the theory of pleomorphism and terrain theory rather than germ theory. And so we know that's pretty hot topic now. Can you catch something? And then there are the schools of thought, which I subscribe to, of that we don't catch anything. We build a healthy, happy, inherent body, and the terrain takes care of things. And so a good example of that, so from pleomorphism, is that strep lives in our throats. And it is a natural symbiotic organism in our bodies. But when we are stressed, when our pH is off, when our lymph is congested, when we have focal blockades, when there are issues going on in our terrain, then the strep goes through a pleomorphic process where it upgrades and becomes pathogenic rather than symbiotic. And so these remedies help bring these bacterial forms, these fungal forms, these viral forms back into a symbiotic relationship with the body. And so I got really involved in that. And that's how I got into European biological medicine. And so I am a naturopath trained. And of course, I've studied functional medicine forever as well. And so I integrate all of that along with traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and everything else I've studied along the way. But European bioregulatory medicine is something that's on the foundation and really is why I can have such great results, why I work with very sick people, cancer patients, autoimmune people who don't know what's wrong with them, because it really looks deeper. So functional medicine is looking at the microbiome, at the gut. It's looking at heavy metals, getting them out and so forth. European bioregulatory medicine is looking at the extracellular matrix. It's looking at the lymphatic system. It's looking at bioenergetics. It's looking at the constitution of a patient. So we all have different constitutions, and how we express illness is related to our constitution. And so it takes into account that, are you a good detoxifier? Are you not a good detoxifier? So it's just, I feel like it's like the basement, the foundation level. From there, which we can grow. It really looks at blockages. So a big part of European bioregulatory medicine is the teeth. And so dental health. And so I'm always kicking patients out of my office, sending them off to go to the dentist, because until they clear the blocks in their mouth, doesn't matter what I do, they're not really going to get better. I'm looking at their scars, which can really affect their autonomic nervous system. So I'm obviously looking to make sure I'm looking through heart rate variability, making sure that they're in the parasympathetic mode, which I'm sure you know most people do not start off that way. And it takes a lot of work to get them there, living in the environment that we live in these days in our universe.
I have about 10 more questions I want to ask based on what you just said, but so when did you get to travel to Switzerland? So
I'm sorry, did you say when did I get to travel?
yeah, or did you? It sounds like you did.
Oh yeah, so I've been back and forth to Switzerland many times, to Germany many times, and that's where I learned a lot of this medicine. And so in Switzerland, for instance, the medical clinic has a dental clinic. They work hand in hand, and we don't really have that here. I have dentists that I work with hand in hand, but right there, it's under the same roof. So when they're doing grand rounds and looking at the patients, the dentistry is right there first and foremost. And then of course, in Switzerland, they're able to do things like hyperthermia and inosphoresis and live cell therapies. They're allowed to do a lot of things that the FDA doesn't like us doing here, because they actually work. So I work a lot, whether with sending patients there or bringing patients there, and learning what's going on there, so that I can do as much of it here in the States that I can, that's legal, that's allowed, and then sending, if you have to send a patient over because they need, which it always blows my mind that hyperthermia is illegal, or whatever you want to call it, which it's just, hyperthermia is just heating up the body to increase white blood cell production. So seems like it should be pretty okay, but it's not, unfortunately.
I looked at the Paracelsus Academy's website, but I didn't catch, what city is that in Switzerland?
It's in Lustmühl.
I don't even know where that is.
So the nearest, so when you go, you fly into Zurich. And then you take the train to St. Gallen, which is like usually where we stay. It's the biggest city, the biggest little city nearby, but Lustmühl is where the clinic is. And the clinic actually has just undergone a lot of changes. So I'm actually have branched out and worked with some other clinics there as well. Dr. Thomas Rao, who you may have heard of, he was at the Paracelsus clinic for, I mean, probably over 20 years. And he just recently left, and there's new ownership. So it's a little topsy-turvy right now. But well, it's beautiful.
I was going to talk about menopause, which we're going to go back to that, but let's stay on the topic of the importance of dental health for a moment here. So you talked about blockages in the mouth. So what do you mean by that?
So first and foremost would be amalgam fillings. So anyone who's listening, if you open your mouth and you see silver in there or metals in there, those need to come out. And of course, I'm not prescribing what you should do, but it is advised that you find a good biological dentist, because one of the things, I'll just say this. So for anyone listening, if you're like, oh my gosh, I have amalgam fillings, I have metals, I'm just going to go to the dentist and get rid of them. That is not a good idea, because if you go to someone who doesn't know what they're doing, it's worse than keeping them in your mouth. And so I always, when I take a new patient and I'm doing their intake, it's always like, how would you get them removed if they say they had them removed? And if they're like, oh, my dentist did it. He just thought he would do it for me, and he didn't really protect me or prepare me or drain me or anything. I just cry a little inside.
Cringe a little. Yep.
And I just go, okay, we're gonna have to do a little work, because then I know they're just going to be laden with metals in their tissues and their fat cells and so forth. So it's really important to be prepared, to make sure you're draining your emunctories, your eliminatory organs are open and you're draining before you undertake that. And when you do it, that you go to a dentist who prepares you properly, protects you. It's great to have vitamin C drips running, and then afterwards to be properly draining as well. And then you can go and do heavy metal, like a provoked heavy metal test to see what's left in your body. So I never do heavy metal testing on someone if they have a mouth full of metals. You want to wait until the metals are out.
Yep.
So, and then of course, root canals are another biggie that can really mess up regulation. So each tooth is related to acupuncture meridian. So for example, your front two teeth are the kidney and bladder meridian. Upper molars are the stomach meridian, and the breast lies on the stomach meridian because the stomach meridian goes right through the breasts. So those are very common, that there will be a root canal in those teeth and a woman will have breast cancer. So often, if you go to Switzerland, you have breast cancer. If you have a root canal, those are coming out. And they did a study where they really looked and saw, I think it was like 100 patients who had breast cancer. 97 of them had a root canal in that tooth. So there's really a correlation between doing something to that tooth and having it affect the organ. And it can go the other way too, where there's something happening in the organ and it can come up and affect the tooth as well. So it's a reciprocal relationship there. But root canals are anytime we start talking dentist and teeth, it's a very touchy such situation. Not many people want to go to the dentist, want to have teeth removed. And when you're in Europe, it's pretty hardcore. Here in the States, there's a little bit of a discussion, but the way I was trained is if there's a root canal, the tooth comes out. So I think it's just, I do thermography scans, and it looks at all the teeth, the regulation of the teeth. So I can see this tooth is not regulating. So if I see someone has a tooth that's not regulating and there's a root canal there, then I'm like, yes, that tooth needs to come out. If they have a root canal and the tooth is regulating and their health is good, optimally, you'd still want to get rid of it. But again, if it's in a place for their bite or their smile, sometimes we can just do ozone injections and things to keep the regulation open. So it's really an individual situation, but the health of the mouth is so overlooked. And I mean, I used to think like that too, because we've just kind of been trained. You go to the dentist once a year to get your teeth cleaned. And if you have any fillings, they fill them. And we never really stop to think, well, the mouth is actually connected to the rest of the body. It's the beginning of our digestive tract. And it really does interact with our organs and our health. And so making sure you have proper gum health, making sure if you have metals in your mouth, which I don't recommend, but if you have metals in your mouth, there can be galvanic currents of the metals interacting with each other. So it's important to go to a dentist who measures the galvanicity of what's going on in your mouth as well. And then how you're being filled. So white fillings are very popular if you're not going to get metals, but you have to think of the white fillings are plastic and is there BPA in them? So going with something more of like a ceramic filling is a lot safer. Also implants.
Keep going.
So implants also, so the big thing is to get titanium implants. So you pull a tooth and then you put an implant. However, titanium is just as toxic as mercury. So the biological way now to do it is to use a zirconium implant. So all of these things are just really important to know and kind of have a handle on, because if you go and do implants, that's like a huge undertaking financially, mentally, emotionally, physically. And then to have someone say, all right, well, now you put toxic implants and I got to redo everything. That is super stressful, and that does not contribute to healing. So it's just good to know about these things. If you find yourself in a position that you could go, wait a second, what'd that doctor say? I better find a holistic dentist, a biological dentist who really knows what they're doing.
I've had patients report all sort of crazy symptoms resolve when their root canals are removed, like overnight. It's nuts. Yeah. It's sometimes you just wonder, like, holy cow. And this episode will launch after an interview that I did with a biologic dentist who does talk about root canal removal and safe removal of mercury fillings. So we have him as a resource as well, especially if
Perfect.
you're local, especially if you're local. I
Excellent.
like that you mentioned that. When you were talking about, after you mentioned blockages, you mentioned scars. Were you talking about scars in the mouth or just scars in the body in general that you're assessing
Well,
for?
scars all over the body. So, I mean, the original scar is the umbilicus, but scars in the tonsils from removal, scars from an appendix removal, scars from an accident, scars, a big one is C-section,
Yep.
scars on the breasts, if there's been reconstruction or
Or
reduction.
biopsy or yeah.
So lots of scars. And so scars, that's from the neural therapy school of thought, which is also a European bioregulatory way of thinking. And so the scars, just like we're talking about root canals, the scars also create blockages in the autonomic nervous system, in the organs, in the meridians. And so, plus scars can hold a lot of emotions because, especially like C-sections, now some women do plan a C-section, but often C-sections happen because they're
not planned. Yeah.
they're an emergency C-section, and a lot of trauma goes along with that. And a lot of we women, which I'm on a mission to change, but women like to beat themselves up and need to be perfect. And so when a woman plans a natural pregnancy and has to have a C-section, a lot of energy and emotions go into that scar. So injecting the scar with Procaine, and you can use other remedies to open up the scar, helps to release the scar. It resets the nervous system. And a lot of times patients will cry, they'll release the trauma, which is really important. We want to do everything we can to be releasing our trauma. And so clearing the mouth, clearing the scars, those are some foundational things to look at before working with any patient, because it's just gonna level the playing field. So not to say microbiome isn't important and all of those things, of course they're important, but these are just kind of the way I look at the body of foundational things. I want to clear as much as I can so the body's able to regulate better.
I love it. I love it. Okay, let's go on to drainage. So you've mentioned even before having a root canal, or basically before even having your mouth worked on, you want to make sure your body is draining well. So when you say draining well, do you mean that the lymph is moving, that nothing's stagnant, that you're having regular bowels, or can you speak more to that? And let's, if you're talking about lymphatics, can you talk about the importance of the lymphatic system?
Yes. So I call them the emunctories, which is an old nature cure term, which is your eliminatory organs. So just what you said, yes, make sure your bowels are moving. If you're a woman, make sure that your flow is flowing, your monthly cycle, because I think of that as an elimination, as drainage through the uterus. Your kidneys, your lymphatic system, your liver, your lungs, your skin. So those are the main ones we look at. And so you want to make sure, a lot of times when patients have what's called a Herxheimer reaction, where they're detoxing and then they get sick, that's because they weren't properly draining at first. And so when they started to detox, the toxins that started to be mobilized had nowhere to go. And so they just recirculated and made them sicker. And so it's really important that we think in a process way of, okay, we want to open everything up. Are the lungs working? Does this patient know how to breathe? Because most of us don't know how to breathe and forget about breathing as one of the greatest tools we have for healing. Is the lymphatic moving? The lymph is this lost system that no one really pays attention to. In general medicine, you can go to a cardiologist, you can go to a pulmonologist, a urologist, but you can't go to a lymphologist. And the lymph is so important for circulating, for bringing in good nutrients, for getting rid of the toxins. If you have stagnant lymph, there's no way you can be healthy. And the lymph, unlike our blood and our circulatory system, doesn't move automatically. So you and I are sitting at our desk talking to each other over Zoom, and our heart is still pumping our blood, but our lymph not doing anything now unless we get up and start moving. And so it's really important that we pay attention to actually moving our lymph, that we make it a daily practice.
Love it, love it, love it. So how does someone know if they have stagnant lymph? Like, other than having constipation or a Herxheimer reaction, like, how do you know if their lungs are open, if they're breathing well, or if they're like, or I'm thinking more like fluid retention, if the patient's puffy,
Yeah,
that sort of, yeah.
definitely puffy, cellulite, if you're constantly sick, if you're bloated, if you're fatigued, if you have weight gain. I will tell you, so I mentioned the thermography before.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
let me jump
yeah.
back to that for a second. So many people listening may have heard of a thermography machine as a picture and something you do if in lieu of a mammography. So the thermography machine I use is not just a camera, because those infrared cameras, they were really calibrated for the Army, and they were calibrated to be able to look at tunnels and bridges. They weren't really calibrated to look at what's going on in the human body. And so there's some benefit to them, but I don't really trust them. And so the one I use is from Germany, and it's computerized regulation thermography. And what it does is uses a handheld infrared sensor that takes point readings over 130 points all over the body. So I mentioned before that it takes the points. So it does all the teeth, it does the sinuses, and it does your lymph. So it's the only tool that I know of that actually is a diagnostic tool for the lymphatic system. Can't really run blood work on the lymphatic system. You can't really run urine or saliva. There's really no tests to do for the lymphatic system except for this thermography. So I've been working with this thermography for 20 years since I've been in practice. I learned about it in Switzerland when I would go over to the clinic. And I can tell you that every single patient has messed up lymph. Like I never saw a patient where I was like, oh my goodness, your lymph looks amazing. And so it just really got me thinking that everyone needs their lymphatic system addressed, because think of how we are as a population. Sitting is what they say, sitting is the new smoking. And so we don't, so many people are sedentary, they don't move, they don't sweat. And what I also found was that, so if you have heard about the lymphatic system, you've probably heard you should dry skin brush and you should bounce up and down on a little trampoline.
Rebound. Yeah.
So what I found was those don't make changes in the lymphatic readings, nor does just taking some lymphatic herbs. You really have to be getting in there, moving it with a light beam generator, the lymph star with color. I do color puncture, color to different points will move the lymphatics. You have to be sweating and doing the drainage remedies and taking the herbs and doing the dry skin brushing. But I found that it wasn't enough to just do those simple things, that our lymph is really stuck. And so it's a crucial part in getting everything open so things can flow through the extracellular matrix and can get to the cells. We're always so concerned with taking the right supplement, but if we don't clear the highway to get to the cells, and the supplements start to bog down the body, they start to become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And I'm a huge fan of supplements. I mean, I'm not by my supplement cabinet, but if I showed it to you, you'd be like, oh yeah, she takes a lot of supplements. So I'm not saying anything wrong about supplements. Again, it's thinking in a systematic way and opening everything up. So when you do go in and give, you get the best bang for your buck and you get a good reaction from the body.
I love that. We have not talked about, not very much about lymphatic drainage. So that was good. That was great. Let's go back to menopause for a moment. Just one of your specialties. Yeah. So your bio speaks about helping women pause so they can live their second best half, right, in their life. So when you say pause, that makes me think like meditation, deep breathing. Is that what you mean by pause? Is meditation something you incorporate with your practice? I've heard you say mindfulness is the best medicine, so I'll let you respond to that.
So yes, I am trained to teach mindfulness meditation, and I do. That was another thing I was very fortunate to find in my early days in medical school. So I always say I grew up as a bioregulatory physician, and as mindfulness meditation being the best medicine there is, and just got incorporated into the way I think as a physician. And so I definitely am a huge fan of breath work, of mindfulness. When I say pause, as far as menopause, to me, the first and foremost thing is about the actual art and act of pausing. because we say menopause and we're talking about the cessation of our menstrual period. But to me, it's this beautiful opportunity to pause in our lives and to really look at where have we been, where are we currently, and where do we want to go? Because if we don't do that for ourselves, not even our best friend is going to do that. They're busy, starring in their own story. And we don't have that incorporated into our culture to review our life, to think about our life. And that's why, sadly, I think so many people die and they have regrets and they are unfulfilled and they didn't live the life they really dreamed of living. And so that breaks my heart. And I feel like for women, when they get to menopause, to me, it's the beginning of the sacred second act. And I think there's actually an act after that. So I'm all about longevity. And so, but it's this second act of where if you had children, probably they're close to flying the coop and leaving. The nest is going to become empty. Maybe you're still working, but maybe you're thinking of winding down or retiring. And it's just this opportunity to look at, who have I been taking care of? Have I been taking care of myself? Because most of the time you've been taking care of everyone else and not yourself. And so when I work with women, we really look at that. And what are your dreams? What did you dream of? What do you want to do? What lights you up? Because so often we just get stuck in the rat race, the habit trail wheel, where we wake up, we run around, we do the errands, we go to work, if we're lucky, we grab a workout or we catch a yoga class, but we never really stop to think about what our dreams are. What did you dream of as a child? And what do you want to do? And so for me, when I went through menopause, I climbed Kilimanjaro, and
wow.
I stood on top of Kilimanjaro, and the universe worked it out perfectly that it was literally 1 year after I had stopped my cycle. And that
Perfect menopause. Yes.
That was because UPS lost not UPS, the airlines actually lost our luggage. And so our climb started a couple of days late. And that's like my thing. When my youngest son went off to college and I had an empty nest, we went and did the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu, because hiking is a big love of mine. And when my kids were young, I was a single mom, raising them on my own. And so it was hard to travel. And one of my things that lights me up is traveling and nature. And so I like to celebrate and mark these big occasions. Yeah. We're so big to mark. We mark death, we mark marriage, we mark births, but I'm about marking menopause, empty nest, divorce, all these other things, all these big turning points in our life. And so that's what I did to celebrate menopause. And it was for me to say, this is just the beginning. You're not getting older. I mean, I am getting older, but this doesn't mean you're winding down and can't do things, because I run retreats. We call them Women of Wisdom, WOW retreats. And we do salon style circles with the talking sticks and share our feelings. And I've heard things that women really believed until they came to a retreat, that menopause is the end, means you're going to die soon, means you can't have sex, means you're old, all these fallacies. And so I wanted to just stand on top of that mountain and say, this is just the beginning for me. My body is healthier now than it ever was. Because you hear a lot, oh yeah, I went through menopause and it's just not the same. And well, I'm getting older, so that's what's to be expected. And I'm here to say that's BS.
You're celebrating menopause. I love that. I love that. A part of, at least how I treat patients who are in menopause, is with bioidentical hormones. Is that part of European, am I saying this right, biologic medicine? Is that something that you also use with your patients?
It is. And we call it bioregulatory medicine.
Okay.
But some people call it biological. But so yes, they do use some hormones over there. But I think we have a much better handle on that over here. So I really integrate the best of everything. So I'm a huge bioidentical hormone proponent. And I would say that, I mean, what I did learn over there a long time ago, which now is more common knowledge, But for instance, testosterone doesn't cause prostate cancer. We actually use testosterone to treat prostate cancer. Estrogen doesn't cause breast cancer. We actually use certain forms of estrogen to treat breast cancer. And so bits and pieces, but a lot of my knowledge and training of bioidentical, I think we have better testing over here when it comes to that. I credit a lot. I've learned a lot from Jonathan Wright, who I think
Yes,
is.
I did the A4M fellowship. Yeah, he's smart.
Yeah, so
funny, smart guy.
He's the grandfather of, he wrote the first script for BIS. So I tend to find who's at the top and knows what they're doing, and then I
learn from them. Yes,
everything. So it is part of it, but more that how I integrated it in with looking at all the other things, because I just won't give someone hormones unless we've really looked at their terrain and made sure the lymph is flowing and everything is clear, because I don't feel like it's going to benefit them as much. And I really want women and men to take control of their health and their body. And it's sort of easy to just take some hormones and feel fantastic. But if you just do that and you don't do the other things, ill health is going to catch up with you. So I'm very strict about who I let refill their hormones, and I make sure what they're doing and they've done everything. So sometimes we're like, nope, you're not allowed to have your hormones because you got to do X, Y, and Z first. And because you use them in your practice, how great they feel. I always tease. I was just lecturing a couple of weeks ago about this, and I was talking about progesterone, and I had a picture on the PowerPoint of a bouquet of flowers. And I'm like, you might be thinking, why is there flowers with progesterone? I'm like, that's because if I want to fulfill my flower addiction and get patients' husbands to send me flowers, I give the patient progesterone. The husband's so happy that his wife is back, and then I get flowers. It's like a really big deal.
Hormones are life-changing, but I love that you say, and maybe I should be doing this too, withholding the hormones until patients are compliant with other aspects of lifestyle. So I love that. I want to go back to thermography for a minute there, because you're also being wise in that you're potentially screening patients for any existing cancer also before you would give them hormones. So have you found with your thermography machine, like, do you detect cancers? Do you find those sort of things?
Absolutely. So for women, the thermography machine is a specific screening for breast cancer, and for men, it's a screen for prostate cancer. And so we have 13 different criteria that we look at, from the teeth we were talking about, those stomach to the liver, to the sternum, which is the breastbone. So the sternum is a big regulatory component for whether someone has an issue with their breast. There's about 4 of those markers are lymphatic markers. So it's always lymph is always one of the first things. And we know a lot of breast cancers start in that upper outer quadrant. And so there's where all that lymph is. It's also looking at, there's different patterns that have just been seen over and over again in the thermography scan. So we're looking at the opposite ovary, we're looking at the liver health. And I didn't mention before, but another important emunctory is the gallbladder, because of the bile production. And so we always think about the liver phase 1, phase 2, but I think of the gallbladder phase 3. And so that's another important one. So yes, I do use it as a screen for breast cancer, and you can see the temperature differences. So anything more than like a 0.5 degree change, if one breast is hotter than the other, I'm concerned, and we're starting to do things and then rechecking. So there's no double-blind placebo studies, as in a lot of the medicine we both do, but I know that I have saved so many women because I can see in their thermography, their lymphatics and the teeth and the liver and all of these things, and we can reverse that through therapies and then recheck. So it's a really, and breast cancer is one of my specialties. So when I told you in the beginning of the story, I went to school to become a pediatrician, and I went through all my clinical rotations were around pediatrics and psychiatrics, because I had a brother who had committed suicide. And so I wanted to learn that as well. And then I opened up my clinic, and the 7th patient in my door was an elderly gentleman in his late 60s who had pancreatic cancer and was told he was going to die. And he was driving by and saw my sign and said, "What can you do for me?" And I was like, I had never seen a cancer patient in all of medical school. So I was like, oh my goodness. But then I remembered that saying I always say, that the universe will only send you what you can handle. And so I was honest with him. I said, I've never treated a cancer patient, no less end-stage pancreatic cancer patient. I said, but I have a philosophy of how the body works and heals, and I can apply that to you and we can see what happens. And he did it, and he ended up being cured. And
Wow.
it was like this huge lesson for me. Don't be bogged down in diagnosis. Remember how the body works. It doesn't really matter what. And of course, I did some more special things because of what his diagnosis was. But then they took me to his church and celebrated me. And long story short, I started getting a lot of cancer patients. And so my practice changed, and I started doing a lot of naturopathic oncology. And then I had a patient walk in with Suzanne Summers' book many years ago. And this is probably like almost 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And she said, I want to do this. Suzanne Summers wrote this book about bioidentical hormones, and I want some. And I was like, all right, I thought she was an actress, but okay. I was like, give me the book, let me read the book. And I read the book and I thought, wow, this is very naturopathic, replacing with subphysiological doses, giving what the body makes, as Dr. Jonathan Wright always says, copy nature. And so I thought I could definitely do this and add in the other things I know. And that's how I got into menopause and bioidentical hormones. And so it's always, I learned so much from my patients, equally as much as they learn from me, if not more.
Totally agree. Good story to wrap up the show. Before I close this out here, I ask every guest what their top longevity tip is. You've given us a lot of tips today, but what's your top longevity tip?
Oh gosh. I would say breathing, sleeping, and having sex. I'll give you 3.
Okay, I'll take it. We'll take it. I haven't heard anyone say, well, everyone says sleeping, but not breathing or having sex. So we'll take those. Well, tell us where listeners can find you again, where your clinic is, your website, and I hear you have a free gift for the listeners as well.
I do. I have my 5 Myths About Menopause ebook, where they can learn, as we talked about some of them, so they can read a little bit more. And then basically I'm Dr. Sharon Stills on Facebook. I do have a Red Hot Sexy Menopause Facebook group. Although I think I'm going to be migrating to Circles and off of Facebook, where the censorship is. I'm Dr. Sharon Stills on Instagram. I do a lot of work for the Bioregulatory Medicine Institute. We're brmi.online. So if any of this European stuff I was talking about fascinated you, you can go to our website, and we just have so much information there, articles about current topics and all of these things that I've been talking about. So I host their podcast, which is The Science of Self-Healing. And so I'm really just passionate. We want bioregulatory medicine, just like functional medicine has become very popular. We want bioregulatory medicine to be right up there with it.
Awesome. That was brmi.com. Is that what you said?
.online.
Oh, .online.
We missed .com.
Got it. Awesome. Well, I look forward. I want to read the 5 Myths of Menopause also. So thank you so much today for coming on the show, talking about the importance of dental, or I should say oral health, the importance of lymphatics, and reminding my listeners that women can transition gently through different stages in life with natural methods and really celebrate menopause, that menopause is a time to celebrate. So thank you so much today for your brilliance. Thanks for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.